Welcome to Beyond the Boardroom, the podcast for leaders, change makers, and purpose-driven souls who believe business can be both powerful and human. I'm your host, Jen Demiri, founder of JD Consulting, culture shaper, connection creator, and champion for authentic, connected leadership. Here we go deeper than metrics and meetings. We explore the real stories, raw moments, and bold ideas that shape how we lead and who we become in the process. From workplace culture to conscious strategy, from self-leadership to systems that truly serve, this is where heart meets business. So grab a coffee, take a breath, and join me as we go beyond the boardroom. Welcome back to Beyond the Boardroom, Leading with Purpose and Connection. Today's conversation is powerful, especially for anyone interested in leadership, innovation, and what it really takes to build a business in spaces that weren't originally designed for you. I'm joined by Jasmin, CEO and co-founder of CYBR, a cybersecurity company guiding organizations navigate complex cyber threats while embedding security as a foundation for innovation and growth, particularly in an era of rapid AI advancement. With the rapid rise of artificial intelligence, cyber helps clients harness their potential while addressing new risks, ensuring that AI becomes an enabler of resilience rather than a source of vulnerability. Jasmin's work sits at the intersection of security, leadership, and impact. She is driven by the beliefs that a secure digital future where AI is applied responsibly is fundamental to economic growth and social resilience, as well as individual opportunity. Her vision is a future where security, innovation, and AI go hand in hand for the benefit of all. Cyber's impact extends beyond commercial outcomes, though, with a social impact model that includes pro bono initiatives and programs designed to support the wider community. Beyond her work with cyber, Jasmin is deeply committed to industry development and community impact. She serves as a chapter lead for the Australian Women in Security Network and as chair of the Adelaide Economic Development Agency Advisory Committee, championing both innovation and inclusion at a systems level. In today's episode, we'll explore leadership, thought leadership, building a company in a traditionally male-dominated industry, and the realities facing women in founding roles. We'll also talk about personal brand, purpose-led growth, and why Adelaide is such a powerful place to build and scale meaningful businesses. Most importantly, this is a conversation about courage, backing yourself, building something that matters, and choosing to lead even when the statistics suggest the odds aren't in your favor. Welcome, Jasmin.
Thank you so much for having me.
I'm so excited to be here today. And I really want to dive in straight away. So you're operating in one of the most complex and fast evolving industries right now. What originally drew you to enter cybersecurity and what keeps you here?
Great question. I think a lot of it is that complexity that I find so interesting, and likewise find that I can have a really big impact in. I've always been quite attracted to complex industries and complex problems, and particularly those where there's that human intersection as well. My educational background was in psychology, so I always look at things with that human-driven lens. And when I first entered the technology industry, I was often surprised by how often solutions failed, not because the technology wasn't there, but because there was a lack of understanding and appreciation for just how critical that human element was. So I found my place in the cyber industry really marrying the two. How do you help individuals understand the technology, but also their own behaviour and their own thoughts and beliefs and bias, particularly within a cyber context, and how that contributes to their own security and organisational security more broadly. So it's really that intersection that's kept me here and kept me very interested in the industry.
Yeah, great. And I love that your background is psychology, because I incorporate a lot of interest in psychology into my work. And yes, I haven't studied psychology, but I think it's such an interesting and diverse topic, and it helps in leadership so much because it gives you different viewpoints that a lot of people often don't consider without that sort of background or
Yeah.
in
Absolutely, I agree. And in cybersecurity, a lot we talk about trying to build a cyber secure culture within organizations. But I think if you have that interest, study or not, you can actually extend that further and understand that you'll have a lot of subcultures within your cybersecurity cultures, and people don't always behave the way that you want them to or expect them to. So definitely, I think that lens is so critical towards success in this and many industries.
Yeah, great. So cyber is built around the idea that security should enable innovation and not restrict it. What does that mindset shift require from leaders?
Great question. I think openness, and I think that's something that we see trending in a leadership space and even in a workplace culture space. But I think the ability to understand that there are many truths and many ways to go about things, and that sometimes things can coexist even if they appear to be opposite. Quite often, we go into organizations and we might have one side of a team who are deeply attached to their technical solution, and for good reason. It's a great solution and it's been built well and it achieves the security goals that were intended. However, you might have another side of the team who are sitting there saying, but we can't work and we can't get onto computers and we need to do that in a timely manner. So you have to have that openness to really understand, okay, what are our security objectives and then what are our business objectives and how do we marry the two to create a really good outcome for everyone. At the end of the day, I think if you can't let security be embedded and accepted by organizations, you'll always have groups of people who are just going to subvert controls anyway. I often think of people, if there's a will, there's a way. If they want to get around something, they'll do it. And it's much better to bring people on that journey and allow them to see security and technology as part of that innovation cycle, as opposed to solely seeing it as a barrier which stops innovation.
I think it's also really important to have that conversation with your people. Why is it important that we implement this, that, or the other? And how is it benefiting you in the long term? I think a lot of the times when companies implement something, any type of change really, they're not communicating what the benefits are for the people that are affected by it. Because at the end of the day, if I just get told, well, you need to change, well, why do I need to change? If you give me a reason how that change can benefit me and how it can potentially make my life easier rather than harder, why not explain it to people and really involve them in the whole process?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when we talk about security and technology changes, we often just assume we're asking people to change their behavior, but we're actually asking people quite often to change their attitudes and beliefs toward a certain subject. When you think about it in a cybersecurity context, many people still don't understand the role that they play as an individual in their own security and in organizational security. When you look on a broader lens, a lot of people are still really fearful of cybersecurity and feel that they can't have any impact. And that feeling of stuck and resistance, when you go and ask them to then change their behavior to use a new tool or technology, you're also asking them to change the way they're thinking and actually come at it then from an empowered lens. So if you're spot on, you need to have that piece of education in there to take people on that journey. And I think the way we approach things is if you can give the people all the information that they need, they can actually make really informed decisions about their behavior and their actions. So spot on. I think the more we can educate, the better.
Yeah. And you were saying yourself as well, like very often cybersecurity is framed through that lens of fear or risk. And that education piece, I think, can take a lot away. And that's with any sort of topic ever, if we are actually educating and talking about it and really teaching people on the thing that you're talking about, in this case cybersecurity, I think it helps so much more to get them on board and also implement things maybe in their life at home as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And we know behaviors that can be practiced in a home setting as well as a business setting are going to lead to far better outcomes. So absolutely, anything that an organization can do to empower their teams to go and practice similar behavior at home is a wonderful thing.
Mm. So how has leading a cybersecurity company shaped the way you think about trust, accountability, and responsibility?
Great question. I think trust is a huge thing in our industry. And again, noting that so many of the people we work from are coming from a base of distrust, and not necessarily in us as an organization, but as the whole construct of security and what it means to them. So I think the ability to build rapport and trust is really important. Particularly too, if you're going to ask people to change their behavior and change their values and attitudes, you have to establish that base of trust first. And for us, this is why our work in the industry has always extended beyond our day-to-day client engagements. I think if you really want to build trust, you have to demonstrate a genuine commitment to what you're doing, but also to people more broadly. I think it's really easy, particularly in consulting industries, to think quite narrowly on your client set, who are quite typically, medium, large enterprise and government. But what about the rest of the economy? And I've always thought it's interesting, like Australia and particularly South Australia, our economies of small business. When we look right across the nation, more than 90% of businesses turn over less than 2 mil in revenue. So we very much are a nation of small business. And my belief has always been, if we can't do something to support the majority and build trust and education and awareness among the majority, then I think we're doing a disservice not only to us as an organisation and our values, but also to our place in the industry and also to the nation. I think we all have a responsibility to do what we can to better our communities. And yeah, building that trust has been a really, really important part of that.
Yeah. And I think it's really important as well, while you were saying there's so many small businesses, especially in South Australia, helping them and being safe and cyber secure is so essential as well to help them grow, because it is probably easier to be targeted, while maybe the outcome for a cybersecurity threat for the person attacking isn't necessarily the biggest outcome, but that's where then sort of is the numbers. So yes, maybe the individual may not be big, however we have a lot more to target in that perspective.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's low hanging fruit, right? Like the malicious actors know that typically large organizations have a security budget, and they're taking actions to strengthen and mature their cyber posture. And likewise, they know that many small businesses don't do anything at all. So, if you can make $50,000 from 1,000 businesses and do that in a very short amount of time, that's going to be a far better return on investment than spending all of that time targeting one big business and perhaps not even being successful in that breach.
Yeah. I recently had the opportunity to sit in a room with you on a little bit of educational piece. And there's one question that I do want to ask you now, to just support the listeners in one thing. So you asked that question in the room of, what do you think when it comes to sort of that cybersecurity person hacking you or things like that? Is it like this individual in like a little cafe doing it, or what is it actually? Do you mind just elaborating on what it actually is that people are actually facing, so they get a better understanding of how to deal with it, but also maybe let go of the shame if they are hacked. I think there's a lot of shame attached with individuals, but also small businesses that are attacked.
Yeah, and I'll come back to that point around shame, because I've had some incredibly interesting conversations that have only furthered my desire to share stories like
Mhm.
these with the community, because I think once we understand them through that lens, as you said, it really unlocks something. So the activity you're talking about, often when you come, particularly to my community-based workshops, um, I have people draw what comes to mind when they think of a cyber criminal.
Mhm.
And I've done this exercise with thousands of people, and everything from children to community groups, to older persons, to boards and executives and everyday business owners. And, some 90% of people draw exactly what you've described there. It's a guy in a hoodie sitting in a dark room, um, typing away at the keyboard. Very, very few people have the automatic assumption of a cyber criminal as they actually appear. The vast majority of malicious actors that we see targeting Australian individuals and businesses are malicious actors operating for financial benefit. So they're your everyday criminals. Now, the way in which these people operate is far more sophisticated than what we might think. Um, in fact, there's a huge amount of organised crime that is supporting this cybercrime economy. Um, we see a very large number of people being trafficked into situations where they work in a scam centre or scam bank, and this is called forced scamming. Now, forced scamming industry has been one of the most prolific and marked changes to the human trafficking industry over the past 100 years, and that is that historically, when we think about trafficking, it might have been one buyer who would then look for one or two individuals to be trafficked. Now, when we look at forced scamming, you can have thousands of people in a compound, all of whom are working on different parts of that cybercrime story. So that might be finding targets for one group of people. It might be recording videos for another group of people. It might be actually sitting on the phone for the other group. So you've got this mass organization, which is very much fueled by people who did not intend on being there and did not want to be there. And the point is that the resources that these organised crime groups have continue to get better and better and better, because unfortunately countries like Australia remain incredibly vulnerable, so their attacks are incredibly successful, and with that they have the means then to reinvest in the business and further sophisticate the attacks that they perpetrate against us. So as you said, that idea of shame, we as victims of cybercrime really need to understand that we're up against transnational organized crime. We're not up against a guy in a hoodie. And just further exploring that idea of shame, I've had two really pivotal conversations. I too have a podcast looking at cybersecurity in depth. One conversation was with a lady named Kylie Dennis, who works with victims of cybercrime, particularly romance scams. She's a private investigator and helps people to understand what's actually gone on. She's often hired by friends and family to help that victim understand what is going on. And she told a story and spoke about a victim who she was working with, who up until they had worked together for some time hadn't reported the incident, had lost tens of thousands, near hundreds of thousands of dollars, but really couldn't get past that feeling of shame to go and report it to police, or to someone else, even to many parts of her family didn't know. So yeah, she talked about this immense shame that this person felt. And no sooner had I had that conversation with Kylie, I had a conversation with a man named Michael Brogowski, who was the founder of an anti-human trafficking organization, Blue Dragon Children's Foundation. And Michael spoke about a victim who had been rescued from a scam center. Now, this is the person on the other end of the phone who was actually trying to get money from that person. And this victim shared immense feelings of shame at what they'd done. And they said they didn't want to do it, they didn't want to be involved in it, but they had no choice but to do it. And the shame they felt for contributing to somebody else losing their money was immense. And I think when you look at that and both sides of the coin, it's such an interesting and complex phenomenon that you have people in Australia who are victims who feel that shame. And then you have people, particularly in Southeast Asia, but in other specialized economic zones too, who likewise feel this immense shame in being involved in this. And unfortunately, when you take a step back, the people who really should feel shame probably don't feel a great deal. So it's a deeply complex issue and truly a multifaceted issue that we need to tackle from all sides. You know, I think for us as individuals in Australia, the best that we can do is of course raise awareness if you have that awareness, but protect ourselves, because the harder we make it for this crime to be perpetrated, the less we'll see of it. At the end of the day, these are criminals who want to make money, and if they're not making money from this, well, we can hope that they'll lessen the demand.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. I think this gives the listeners and viewers a little bit of a better understanding of what they're actually up against when they are targeted, and also realize that maybe the person on the other end feels the same amount of shame, feels the same amount of guilt, and doesn't actually want to be involved. So that really both parties are used in a bigger picture criminal act. And yes, thank you so much for sharing. And what I will do as well, in the show notes, I'll pop the link to your podcast as well, so listeners can definitely dive a little bit deeper as well and educate themselves a bit more on cybersecurity, and can of course reach out to you as well if they have any other questions. Now, I want to change gear a little bit from the perspective of cybersecurity has historically been a very male-dominated industry. So what realities did you face stepping into a founder and CEO role in this space?
And it still is a very male-dominated industry. I don't know to hand the latest statistics, but not that long ago, you know, it was still something like only 14% of the workforce in the cybersecurity industry was female. So we still are, facing incredible, an incredible lack of gender parity in the industry, and there are obviously great initiatives which are trying to support and change that. Obviously, the work that Australian Women in Security Networks does is, twofold, both in trying to support women who are already in the industry, but also trying to really explore and understand the barriers that are stopping women from entering the industry or staying within the industry. And I think that work is really important. But I think, unfortunately, we still see that taking a long time to actually take effect. Just the week before last, I spoke with a group of university students who were part of a fantastic program, providing them hands-on experience during their university studies in cybersecurity. And for the room full of wonderfully bright students, but there was not a single female student in the room. I was told there was one in the program, but she couldn't make it that day. But again, that's the next generation, and you sit there looking out, and it is still just a sea of men, wonderful men and great men, and they're going to do great things for our industry. But We've still got a really long way to go. In terms of my personal experience, I think I've I've always thought that I've been quite lucky, I suppose, in a way that I haven't faced some of the overt adversity that many
Mm-hmm.
of my colleagues have. Many of my colleagues will tell me stories of just such blatant disregard for professional conduct. You know, yeah, there are stories sort of coming out of people's ears. But I think for most women in the industry, the what you notice is behaviour that is far less overt, and far more insidious, I think, in culture. One fellow AWSN member speaks often of a story where they were sat around a boardroom table, and she was in a chief information security type role, so very senior, and was leading the meeting. And the other party walks in and turned to her and asked for a coffee because they thought that she was there in an administrative capacity. So she tells the story. She got up and walked away and made the coffee and sat back down and then started the meeting, which I think raised a few eyebrows. But I think it's behaviour like that most of us notice more commonly in the industry. And it's that I think is really difficult to change, because that's years and years of societal conditioning. So, I think from a leadership perspective, what I try and do is be very, very visible and show everyone, not just young women. And I think the more we continue to try and just focus on, show visibility for young women, yeah, that's needed so that those women feel inspired to go on and do similar things. But it's to show everyone that women do a great job in this industry and in every industry, and absolutely in positions of leadership and authority and power. So I think, the best we can do is show up and be bold and be brazen. I often say to people, in whatever capacity I exist, it's certainly not to sit there and nod my head and agree with everything. I think we have to be bold and brazen if we want to change the trajectory in this industry and in many other industries. And I feel most passionately about in leadership and positions of political power too.
Yeah. And I think I had the privilege of meeting some amazing, really intelligent women in cyber tech or AI. And some of them, yes, as you said, they fall into the background and they are holding back in one way, shape or form of founding something or scaling in those sectors. And it's such a shame because, oh my God, the wisdom that these people have, these women have, sometimes even outweighs certain knowledge that I have experienced through conversation with men in that industry. And then add on top the emotional intelligence to that. Companies that don't work with women in those industries actually lose competitive advantage, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So besides making sure to be seen, what can women that are listening now and feel drawn to those spaces and are intimidated by the stats, what would you want them to know besides make sure you're visible and, show up for yourself and stand your ground in that space?
I think understanding that there are, and this is true of all of all industries where there is still that lack of women and lack of representation. You will always find a strong group of women in those industries, and I think the sooner that you can find them and attach to them, the better. I certainly speak for the cyber industry that I think we're so far beyond that idea of competition. I think it's very easy, and you can understand how it happens when quite often there might be one spot for a woman, so everyone feels like they're competing for that one spot. It's certainly not that way anymore. So I think we've moved far beyond that idea of competition to now collaboration. So I'd say find the groups wherever they exist. I know obviously we have AWSN, but there are other groups in the cyberspace as well. And the same thing, I'm part of a Women in Resources group because we do quite a lot of work in that industry. And that too is an underrepresented industry for women. And that group is, wonderfully collaborative. So find your people and stick with them. And they don't necessarily have to be from that industry either. I know you and I have had a wonderful time connecting at the founders lunches, and through that we have conversations that, oh yeah, that's the same in my industry and that's the same in my industry. So I think that idea of solidarity and community is really, really important. But yeah, I think if people are looking at moving or transitioning into the cybersecurity industry, it's understanding that wonderful opportunities exist, and you're no less qualified or able or capable than somebody else. So go and do it.
Yeah, perfect. And again, I will pop some details into the show notes as well to really make sure that especially women that are listening have access to some groups that they may have not known about. So at least, we can cover that a little bit and support them on their journey in collaboration to move forward in their way and the way they want to lead the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And probably just on that point too, there are quite often programs and initiatives to get more women to enter, for example, the cybersecurity industry. So I'd keep an eye out for them. And even if you feel like, perhaps you don't meet every requirement or you're worried about getting in, apply for them, because you just never know what opportunity that might lead to. And in my experience, we still don't have enough women applying to them. So your chances of being accepted into the program are great too. So I think, take advantage of those opportunities.
Yeah. I think just to in a way divert and come back at the same time, it's still this thing of women even don't apply for jobs that they're 70 to 80% qualified for, while men just apply for jobs that they may not even be 50% qualified for, just because they feel, oh yeah, I can do this, while women are actually capable of doing it. And they still don't apply for those jobs. So apply for those grants, apply for, whatever it is that you want to apply for. It doesn't matter if you feel ready. At the end of the day, I don't think anyone is ever 100% ready, but you just need to start moving towards it in order to become more ready every day.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And I think too, there's still such a culture and again a societal expectation around perfectionism for women, and I think that leads towards so many women not taking opportunities for fear of failure. So I think that the sooner that women can have that internal conversation with themselves and try and reframe how they see that failure. And this is something I continue to do every day to remind myself that you have to go for those opportunities, and perhaps looking at it as an experience and getting the data rather than a failure is necessary to do the things that you might not otherwise do.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you're not just building a company, but you're shaping conversations across industries, government, and communities. So how do you approach thought leadership intentionally?
It's a good question. I think, again, it's about openness, but also listening. I think there's really something for listening and understanding what people actually need and what people actually resonate with, because it's really easy from a thought leadership perspective to be deeply passionate about an area and be very qualified and have wonderful, wonderful examples, wonderful research, wonderful education in that space, and to go really deep into that perhaps niche sector or section of the sector. And at the end of the day, if that doesn't resonate with people, you could have the most wonderful idea and the most wonderful information to share, but if you're not sharing it in a way that resonates, then you haven't really done much to lead. So I think, really deeply understanding what do people need and what do they say they need and what do you think they need, and where's the middle of that ground. So I think that's one thing. I think when I look at my community work, it's certainly not, the most exciting aspects of cybersecurity or the bits that I'm most passionate about, but it's what those people need. And I'm really, really happy to be known for the person that educates in a really human-centric manner, because that's what people need. And I think if you want to lead, you have to meet people where they're at and give them the tools and empower them to then get to that next level. And perhaps after you do that foundational work, then you can look at some of the cool, really exciting stuff in cybersecurity. But at the end of the day, you meet people where they're at first.
Yeah, and I love that you say that, because I can resonate with it from my personal experience. The way that I do leadership, education, leadership development is very different and very niched in comparison to a lot of other companies. And initially, yes, I was listening to what people wanted and needed. However, I initially really struggled in communicating how what I do supports them in that. So, and it took a lot of tweaking and working on it to actually get there. And sometimes it's one of those things where I sit there, it's like, well, I can't actually explain to you what I do. You just have to experience it. That's sometimes what I really want to say. So really figuring out how to make it digestible for people. And yes, as you said, meet them where they're at, is just so important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what advice would you give leaders who want to step into thought leadership but fear being too visible? Is there actually such a thing as being too visible?
You got some great questions, Jen. That's a great question. Particularly from an industry perspective, I know there are a lot of people in cybersecurity who don't like the visibility, and it doesn't lend well to their place of the industry and what they want to do. And I think that's an interesting challenge: is how do we share their wisdom and knowledge in a way that perhaps protects that privacy, if that's what they need. So that's an interesting challenge within our industry. But speaking more broadly, I think, and particularly taking a female lens, I think a lot of women shy away from visibility for fear of, I think often for fear of judgment, fear of, retaliation or negativity. I think it's really easy to focus on the 1% of people who might respond or react negatively to something you do, and not the 99% of people that respond positively to what you do. So again, in terms of advice there, that's a conversation we all have to have with ourselves, and that's something we all have to reconcile with ourselves. I think you're doing yourself a great disservice and your community a great disservice if you have this wonderful information that you want to share and you're not sharing it because you're fearful to do so. That doesn't lend anyone well. So I think the sooner we can reconcile with that in ourselves and share, the better. I think too, having a wonderfully supportive community speaks volumes. Having the people that are going to jump on the LinkedIn post and like it and share it and do all those things makes a huge difference, particularly when you're just starting to put yourself out there, particularly in an online context. So find those people, find that community, and have the conversations too. Like if you have a wonderful group, whether that's industry based or not, of other leaders or other people in similar positions, or even extending to a friendship group, say, hey, I want to do this. I want to do this thought leadership piece. I'm going to post twice on LinkedIn a week for the next 3 months. It'd mean a lot to me if you'd support me. I think, that's another thing as women. We don't ask for things that we need. We're very good at taking it all on. We're very good at doing for other people, but we're not always great at asking. And sometimes I look at my male colleagues and they'll pick up the phone. We'll have a conversation. They'll need something. They'll pick up the phone. They'll ask. And still sometimes I sit there and I go, wow, that's so incredible. You just pick up the phone and you ask. But it really is that simple. So I think the sooner we can all remind ourselves that we deserve that support and should ask for that support, the better.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Ask for what you want. I think your chances of getting what you want increases by 50%, because you can either get a yes or a no. It's always going to be a no if you don't ask. But if you ask the question and ask for the support, you at least get, you're already halfway there. What I also want to add to that is sometimes people that we work with are more or that we know through networking or things like that are often more supportive of what we do than our own families when they want to start something. I think that's a whole different version of fear again. We don't want them to fail. We want to make sure they're safe. However, by not supporting them, we're actually setting them up more for failure than we would if we support them in what they want to do. We can always be there to catch them if they have a stumble and lift them back up to keep walking.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think too, particularly, I think too, particularly for women that are just stepping into that idea of spotlight, there are going to be people that don't want to see that, and that actually has nothing to do with you and everything to do with themselves. So again, I think that there's sort of more distance we can place between our actions and other people's behavior, the better, because quite often there's really no correlation between what we've done. It's all about how they interpret and receive that information related to their own schema and the challenges that they're having. So I think that's a good reminder too, like particularly if there's that fear of backlash online. Because, I can tell you now, the people that sit there and write negative comments on advertiser articles, they're probably not doing so well themselves, because honestly, who has the time and who has the desire to bring people down in that way if they're doing well and in a positive frame of mind themselves?
Not only that, they are more than happy to do this in a public forum like that, but would never dare saying it to your face.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely.
So, shifting gears slightly, you're a strong advocate for Adelaide as a place to build and lead. So, what makes this city such a fertile ground for founders? I mean, I'm still pretty new to Adelaide. It's only been 2 years, just over 2 years. And I definitely feel that Adelaide is very different to other cities. So, what makes this city so different for you in this space? Ground for founders.
I had the great privilege of growing up between Adelaide, Melbourne, and Sydney. So I moved quite frequently throughout my childhood. So I really felt like I got to immerse myself within each city and understand, for better or worse, what they were all about. I also spent a lot of my younger childhood in Hong Kong too. And at the time, came back to South Australia quite often. And my mum often tells this story of how I would get off the plane on the way back from Hong Kong. And as I landed in Adelaide, I would take these deep and very exaggerated breaths, such that once somebody asked her if I was having a medical episode, and she goes, no, that's just my daughter. But it was this great sense of appreciation to be in a city that felt so at home, but also so safe and secure. And I think too, I really at the time appreciated the clean air. And as I've got older, I've often returned to Adelaide and felt very much the same way, that it's a city that you can breathe in, but also move in, because there is that room for opportunity. Having just been over to Melbourne and spent some time in the innovation and startup ecosystem there, coming back to Adelaide, you really just appreciate how different the city is. I think a lot of that's down to investment in the economic development of the city, and particularly in those innovative and startup ecosystems. I'm sitting here recording today from Lot 14, and I mean, what other state has a precinct like this that's had such solid and continued investment to drive and facilitate opportunities for connection? I think a lot can be said for having a precinct where people know innovation is happening. So if you are somebody starting a business, this is the place to go to meet people and to have those conversations. Investment into innovation places, of which the state has several, not just Lot 14, is one big thing. I think also when we think about Adelaide City, having a business economy that's supported by council-led initiatives. Obviously I'm a little bit biased sitting on the committee, but I think what the Adelaide Economic Development Agency does is fantastic. I mean, not many councils, and certainly not many capital cities, can say that they have a dedicated arm just looking at how do we support business and how do we make it easier to do business in our city. So I think we're greatly advantaged by the work done there. And I think too, then if you think about, we've got places, we've got investment, and then I think if you come to people often joked, and I remember this a lot from when I was younger, that Adelaide was a big small town or a small town capital city. And that was often said, in jest, but there was a slight derogatory tone for it. But now I very much appreciate that and think it's a real strength of the city. I don't think it's true, but I think some of the meaning and some of the context is true, in that you are so easily connected to people in this city. You're generally only one or two people away from anybody that you want to meet. And being that small town feel, people are quite happy to build and establish those connections. So I think that's something you don't get in a lot of other cities. I remember being at an event at our town hall last year, and the Lord Mayor said, in what other city can you walk down the street and probably see a councillor and a member of a large business and perhaps a politician, all in the same stretch of road? And that's unique. You are so close to anybody that you could want to have a conversation with, and you're so close to being able to contribute to and affect change as it relates perhaps to the business community or perhaps to something else. That's very unique, and something that I think those who capitalize on it do very, very well.
Yeah. So one thing that I want to touch on is this: you are so close to people that you potentially want to meet, and people are more than willing to connect. I think Adelaide is very interesting and different when it comes to connection. I mean, I have been to so many different networking events, and now it's really nice to step into the room and actually know, at least 25% of the people in the room already. So which is great. Sometimes makes it challenging to meet new people because you're so busy catching up with the people that you haven't seen for a while. And yes, people are very willing to connect with you. However, they need a few different touch points when they connect with you. And that's, I guess, where this sort of small town feeling comes back in, where it's like, well, you are not from here, so we want to make sure that you're the right fit for us and that we can trust you and that we can rely on you. And But then when you do have those connections and you do build those relationships with those people, they have your back left, right, and center. Like, they mention you in rooms, that you're not even in. So I think that's sort of this, yes, sometimes you have to just build that connection on a bit of a longer basis. So it's a bit more of a longer term, for lack of a better word, game in inverted commas. This is, of course, not a game. This is about building genuine connections. And though they are then long term, rather than just a fleeting network connection like you have in other cities. I mean, I lived in Melbourne for a very long time, and I've built a lot of connections, and some of them, yes, were just very fleeting, and you might, like, you see them again at another event, and though that deep, honest connection on the long term is just not there. It's sort of like out of sight, out of mind, while in Adelaide it's very different.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think there's something to say, like, South Australia, and its people is still quite risk averse. And that's a real challenge for those in the startup ecosystem, and particularly those in innovative technologies, whether that be AI or cyber or otherwise, that there is still a really risk averse market that you're trying to build those relationships with. And I think, again, that circles back to that conversation around trust and how do you build it? Because when you also have a market that's risk averse, that trust becomes even more important. I think often of the story, the founder of My Venue, which is a wonderful South Australian success story. He spoke here at Lot 14 late last year, and shared very candidly how they'd had or they'd faced adversity within Adelaide and even beyond within Australia, because the risk appetite is just different. And it's not quite like it is in some overseas markets where there is that, all right, let's take a chance, let's do it. We are a very risk adverse market, and I'd love to see that continue to shift. And I think we do see it slowly shifting. And, I just say more wonderful South Australian success stories are only going to continue to strengthen that shift. But you're right, I appreciate the difficulty there. It certainly does exist.
Yeah. But again, like, even though it may be a bit more difficult, I think the reward at the end is just so much bigger in the long term.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you are also working with the Adelaide Economic Development Agency, and influence how does that influence how you think about business impact beyond profit?
I think being involved with and contributing to AIDA's mission gives me a wonderful opportunity to continue to connect into business across industry. And I think that's something that we should all do, but I think having the opportunity to do it intentionally and to be encouraged to do so is such a wonderful thing. I think the more that we can understand issues and opportunities as they exist outside of our own industry, the better we can all become as a collective, as a community, as a state, and as a nation. We have, a great opportunity here in SA when we, look at some of the stats, be it economic development, be it return to the city. As I said, I was just in Melbourne, and of course I see the figures of what their return to the office looks like post-COVID, and you see it being quite considerably down in other states. But to feel it, to be in the city and go like, where are all the people, is something quite different. Whereas Adelaide's had really good and really positive return to work after COVID, or return to the city after COVID. So we have these great opportunities, and being involved in AIDA lets you see them more than you might otherwise, and lets you share them. But likewise, very much my role is to understand what are the challenges faced by community and faced by businesses, so that as a collective, we can alleviate some of those challenges. Again, I think the more that you can bring people together, you understand that quite often issues are shared and common among businesses. And if we know what they are, we can start looking at how to resolve them. I think, people have to get involved in that process. There are means and mechanisms for us to put better conditions in place for business or to support business in different ways. But if we don't know what those challenges are, we can't then look at the solutions. So I really encourage business. We've got great mechanisms between AIDA and council more broadly. Get involved. Like, if you have a problem, call up your counsellor and talk to them about it, or speak to AIDA and talk to them about it. We've got so much opportunity. We just need people to be involved.
Yeah. Talking about involvement, you are involved in a lot of things. Talk to me about Women Who.
So as I referred to before, we had a wonderful opportunity to connect through a series of lunches that I held last year. And that just came about because I was, again, sitting here in Lot 14 thinking, who are the other female founders in this precinct that maybe I don't know? It would be great to get together and start having a conversation. So, that started with me trolling all the databases and going, okay, well, I think she's the founder, and I think she's the founder, and asking around. And I pulled together this group, and it wasn't very many initially. In fact, I think the first time we caught up, there were like 4 of us or 5 of us. And I just said to that very small room of people, I said, I feel like it would be great to have a format where once a month we could come together and start building this support network, and whether that's to support with introductions, as we spoke about before, whether it's to support with the shoulder to cry on when there's been an issue or a bad day, or what I really hoped and desired for the group is that it would be this opportunity to better one another's businesses in some way. I think women often don't, and I say this tentatively, but I think broadly speaking, women don't often have the same opportunities as men in business. And I think there are a lot of reasons for that. A lot of them are about, again, we've spoken about a lot of those societal expectations, which then have flow-on effects to the ways that women behave and think about themselves and think about their own self-efficacy and self-belief. So there are all of those things. Then I think it's no secret to anyone the additional caregiving responsibilities that are faced by women, particularly now those that are caring for children and also aging parents. And I think, all these things combined, plus, that lens of, oh, well, she's a woman, so she shouldn't be a leader, or she shouldn't have a business, or whatever else. They all still exist. And I think all those things at large place women at a disadvantage, not because they're not as competent or not as capable, but just because that's the society that we exist in. I mean, if we take it back to the startup sector, you only have to look at the funding stats to see that, less than 5% of VC funds go to female-led companies. Like that, the stats don't lie. It's harrowing, but it's the world that we face today. So I thought, with all those things, wouldn't it be great if we had this community and this network of people who are going to try and change those odds, and who are going to support those businesses and create those communities in the same way that men might have already had them, and they may have already existed in different ways. So we started these lunches. We started with that small group. We put it out more broadly than Lot 14, and it grew and it grew and it grew. And by the end of last year, we had half a restaurant full of us for lunch. So it said to me there was this real need and desire for those sort of spaces. And I wanted to accelerate that and to see what else we could do beyond beyond a lunch and what else was there. So woman who was born as the next step of that community, making sure that it's a community accessible both online and offline, and also looking at how do we further showcase what's going on. So we have a podcast launching very soon, showcasing what great things are happening in SA and what great things are women in this state and beyond doing. And then a few other educational programs that give women those skills to go and progress their career, you know, whether that's, we've got stuff in the cyber and AI space, whether it's that direction or perhaps it's the leadership space. At the end of the day, I think it's about accessibility. And most importantly, you know, I think too, there's, as you said, there's great opportunity for network and connection, but I never wanted it to be a barrier where people felt like they had to pay to play. And I think connection should be, you know, authentic and organic. And I wanted this to be a space that facilitated that. Yeah, so that's a little about it.
Great. And yes, we met at one of those luncheons, and I think that was the one where we nearly had half of the restaurant. And what I love about it as well is that flexibility. So people can come and go also, if they are not a founder and are employed and only have like a certain amount for their lunch break, and they can still connect over that with other women to, maybe they are ambitious and want to build their own business and sort of want to see what support is out there. So yeah, I really enjoyed that lunch and also the coffee catch up that we had at that one point. So I'm looking forward to that coming back and attending another one.
Fantastic. We can't wait to have you.
Now, leadership can be isolating. So what practices help you stay grounded and connected to your purpose?
Great question. You know, that's a really good question, and I think, you know, to be open and transparent, I think there's definitely times in my leadership journey where I haven't had those practices. Particularly, you know, when I think back to my corporate career journey, I had wonderful leadership opportunities, but very much all-consuming leadership opportunities. And I think many of us, you know, feel the same way. And it's all well and good to go, oh, you know, make sure you have your breath work and you go for your morning walk and this, that, and the other. But on a practical sense, that doesn't always work. I think what we should talk about more is do the work to understand your values and every day ask yourself if your behavior and the environment that you sit within meets those values. Because if you haven't done that work, telling someone to go and do the breath work or go for the morning walk, it's not going to land and it's not going to translate. So I think for me, something that I've been very intentional in as and before starting cyber was understanding what those values are and understanding what my objectives and intentions are too. And every day, asking, am I living up to those? And if not, what needs to change? I think that's the most important, the most important thing we can do in that space.
Yeah, great. And I have actually wanted to do this for this year. I've wanted to start a ritual question at the end. And I think you already answered that, unless there's anything else you wanted to add. So my new ritual question that I'm planning on asking every guest is, if a leader listening wanted to lead with more purpose and connection starting tomorrow, what's the one behavior they would need to change first and why? So I think you, in a way, beautifully answered that in figuring out what your values are and living up to those values every day, unless there's anything else you want to add to that.
No, I think that, I think that says it all. You know, I have mine written in a note in my phone, and I just make sure that the first thing I do each morning, I'd like to say before I doom scroll Instagram for 10 minutes, but it's probably after, is open up the note and go, okay, like, am I living up to those values? And below that, I have my intentions, and I go, how do I show up today to meet those intentions?
That's great. I love that. I actually, I mean, my business values are very much my personal values as well. And I do my absolute best every day to live by those values, and I have days where I fail miserably, and then I have days where I exceed expectations, and I think that's just human nature. But yes, I have them written on my screen. I have a little whiteboard up there with certain things, and yeah, my values are definitely on there as well. And I think, yes, knowing what your values are and living towards them, I think that's so underrated.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, this brings us pretty much to the end of the podcast. However, is there anything that you want to talk about or address that I haven't asked you and that you definitely want to make sure we share with the listeners?
No, thank you. I think you've done a wonderful job at crafting a wonderful variety of questions, and I think we've covered a little bit of everywhere, so it's perfect. Thanks, Jen.
Right. Perfect. Well, thank you so much for being here. As I said a couple of times throughout, I will pop your details into the show notes, as well as some other little links and tags, so that way listeners can definitely find you, but also all the other information that we discussed. And yeah, thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to our next in-person catch-up.
Perfect. Thanks so much, Jen.
Thank you so much for tuning into this episode of Beyond the Boardroom. I'm truly grateful to have you here. So if today's conversation resonated with you, I'd love for you to follow the show, leave a review, or share it with someone who'd find it valuable. Your support helps us spread the message of purposeful, connected leadership even further. So until next time, take care, stay curious, and lead with heart.